Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Christiana Manpour. Tonight, the war that no member of the U.S. military should ever have to fight. The ongoing battle against rampant sexual assault in the ranks and the struggle for victims to get justice within the military chain of command. About 3,000 acts of sexual violence were reported in 2012, but the Pentagon estimates that in reality there were more than 25,000 incidents. President Obama and Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel are weighing in, and they're vowing to enforce a no-tolerance policy.
For those who are in uniform, who've experienced sexual assault, I want them to hear directly from their commander-in-chief that I've got their backs, I will support them, and we're not going to tolerate this stuff, and there will be accountability. If people have engaged in this behavior, they should be prosecuted.
Only a fifth of all sexual assault cases in the military actually make it to trial. And reporting an assault means dealing within the chain of command. And so the superiors of these assault victims have direct influence over the fate of their cases. And of course, there have been several recent incidents of military commanders in charge of helping sexual assault victims who themselves have actually been charged with assault. Susan Burke is an attorney who represents victims when the cases actually do go to trial, and she's here with me in the studio. Kirsten Gillibrand is the U.S. Senator from New York who recently proposed legislation to overhaul the way the military handles sexual assault cases. Senator Gillibrand and Susan Burke, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Senator, let me ask you first, there you are in Washington on Capitol Hill. What is the biggest challenge with this issue of reporting, prosecuting, and generally dealing with this scourge of sexual abuse?
Well, what we know, Christian, is there's approximately 26,000 unwanted sexual advances, sexual assaults, and rapes every single year. But of that number, only about 3,300 are actually reported. So our biggest challenge is creating a culture and a circumstance under which the victims and survivors are willing to tell their story and willing to report. What the victims have told us is that they fear retaliation, being marginalized, ending their careers, or being blamed. And so we want to be able to create the circumstances under which they feel that they can receive justice within the military system. So what we do in our piece of legislation is remove the reporting and decision-making requirement about whether to proceed to trial away from the chain of command and into the military justice system in terms of prosecutors. Trained military prosecutors will make the decision about whether or not to proceed to trial, and that victim can report directly to that prosecutor.
Well, I'm joined by Susan Burke, and this is obviously something that you and others have been lobbying for, changing the military code of justice. Does this go far enough? Is this what you're asking for?
Well, we definitely applaud Senator Gillibrand for her tremendous work on the issue, along with the other senators, because it gets to the core issue, which is to begin to have an impartial system of justice, a fair system of justice. Right now, it's not only that the victims fear retaliation, it's that they do suffer actual retaliation. So a rational person, when confronted with the problem that reporting the crime has a minuscule chance of leading to incarceration of the criminal, and yet a dramatic chance of ruining their careers, it's simply not rational to report in those circumstances.
And Senator, the thing that blows my mind in reporting all of this is that so often those who are being attacked report it to superiors who are either friends of the attackers or who are either the attackers themselves.
That's correct, Christian. The real challenge is if you have to report to your commander who may know not only your perpetrator, but may be friends with him or certainly may have a bias, that commander is going to be held accountable. So it's also against his own interest to see a case through trial to fruition.
Now let me ask you, you've made this move, you've made this proposal, but it's actually not something that the Defense Secretary approves of. Chuck Hagel, the Secretary of Defense, former senator, has said that he opposes the idea of the chain of command in this regard being changed and putting these cases before proper prosecutors. Let me play what he said about this, and then I want to get both of your reactions.
It is my strong belief, and I think others on Capitol Hill and within our institution, that the ultimate authority has to remain within the command structure. There are things we need to do, should do, will do. to make it more accountable.
So, Senator, how do you react to that, particularly in light of these two gentlemen from the military, officers, who've had to been fired and arrested because they themselves were accused of unwanted sexual advances? Senator, how do you deal with opposition from the Secretary of Defense?
Well, the Secretary of Defense has since really walked that back. He's actually said all solutions are on the table. I've had long conversations with him myself about this topic. And Secretary Hagel himself proposed one change to the UCMJ, which is the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He said he doesn't believe the commanders should no longer have the ability to overturn a jury verdict. And that is a change to the UCMJ. It's Article 60. We are urging a second change to the UCMJ. In addition, we believe that Article 30, which is the decision-making point of whether or not to go to trial, should also be removed from the chain of command. The combination of those two changes, we think, will create a greater climate where victims will believe that justice is possible and that there'll be more transparency and accountability within the system. And so I have not lost hope that Secretary Hagel will change his view on this very issue and show leadership about how we can transform the military justice system.
Susan, how do you feel about what the Secretary says, and do you hope, like Senator Gillibrand does, that he will fundamentally change his view?
Well, and I look at it slightly differently. The Constitution makes sure that we as a democracy have civilian control. So the real people who are the leaders here are Senator Gillibrand and her colleagues in Congress. And they are now stepping forward. A couple of decades of this problem, they're stepping forward and they're realizing, regardless of what the Secretary of Defense says, regardless of how top military leadership feels about having power taken away from them, they know it's their duty to this country, to everyone, to make sure that the men and women who defend this nation have a fair system of justice. I hope that, Secretary Hagel understands why, after 20 years of not solving a problem, his responses are not what's needed. But whether he comes along or not, we're looking to Senator Gillibrand and her colleagues to make sure that there's fairness in America.
Give me a little bit of a sort of a reality check on some of your clients. You have many clients,
yes,
many people
yes.
who you're defending in this regard. What are they saying now?
Well, I think everyone is encouraged and optimistic that we're going to begin to see some real change. But what these people have lived through is horrific. I mean, for example, we had one woman who reported her rape. Nothing was done about it. Instead, she had to continue to salute the rapist. She had to report each day for a body composition check in which he measured her. And so the indignities that go along with being forced to salute people, to stay in close working quarters with them, it makes what is already a crime, it makes the aftermath just very tragic.
Senator, how does this compare with what happens in other allied militaries?
Well, Christian, other countries have already made this decision. Some of our closest allies, the UK, Canada, Australia, and Israel, have already removed serious crimes from the chain of command. So whether it's a rape, a sexual assault, or a murder, those decisions are no longer made by commanding officers. They're made by trained prosecutors, so they can make the judgment about whether or not to go to trial. And I can tell you, the results out of these other nations that are our close allies have been very favorable. And so this is not a change that has never been done. It's not a change that's untested. It's a common sense change that I think brings justice and transparency to our system in our military and will make our military that much stronger. We have the greatest military in the world. We have men and women who are willing to sacrifice everything. We should not be asking them to sacrifice being subject to these crimes at the hands of their colleagues.
Well said, Senator. Thank you very much indeed. And
Thank
Susan
you.
Burke, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.